Alright guys and girls, and we're gathered here to celebrate the 40th birthday and anniversary of the Amstrad CPC 464 being launched into an unsuspecting world, a time in the 80s littered full of failed machines like the Dragon 32, Auric, Enterprise 64 and many more, where arguably even the BBC Micro and Atari 8-bit range were struggling to beat the dominance of the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64. And here entered the new boys, Amstrad. It was 11:30 AM on the 12th of April 1984 at the Westminster School in London that the Amstrad CPC 464 was first unveiled or launched to the press. Not quite the glitzy fancy party you see these days, but big enough to make a splash and decent enough noise as serious contenders. Now, I've always argued that the birthday of a computer or a console should be when it first went on sale to the public, and in the CPC 464's case that was on the 21st of June 1984 at a Rumbelow store. But I'm tired of arguing that case, and everyone by now seems to celebrate it on the 12th of April, including Lord Sugar, who on his Twitter or X always tweets out on that day. So I'm officially giving up and putting this video out today too. But anyway, so this video is a celebration just of the CPC 464. So no games that require extra hardware add-ons or 128k of RAM minimum to run, and of course no GX4000 or plus games. So it will be 10 of the best games commercially released for it back in the day. And when I say 10, I'm going to bend the top 10 structure a little bit, as you will see, and we're just sticking to commercially released games only, so no homebrew stuff. It's never easy doing a top 10 video, and I already hate myself now for deciding to do one, because there was two issues I encountered when preparing this video. 1. The best Amstrad games really are to be found long after its commercial life in the homebrew scene of the last 15 to 20 years, where the hardware has actually been properly utilised and pushed a little, or in some cases the limits broken and abused, and where some time, care and attention has been put into it by the likes of the Batman Group, Bitplane Technomantes and many other very skilled coders. And that's worthy of its own separate video another time, hence me doing this one purely on the commercially released games only. It's important that new people coming to experience the Amstrad for the first time know this. The Amstrad was often treated rather poorly by the big companies of the time, being the third placed machine. They prioritised the Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum versions first, and the Amstrad was often an afterthought and a rushed port in a few weeks if you were lucky. And even if nothing in the top 10 here really takes your fancy, there's hundreds if not thousands more games out there, especially from France, where the Amstrad was the dominant computer, where it was prioritised. Indeed, the CPCpower.com website has nearly 7,500 Amstrad games in its database currently. Yes, some of them may be unreleased or not dumped, or crap basic or public domain games, but if you can't find a bunch of decent games within that huge number there, then there must be something seriously wrong with you. Alright, number 2. Secondly, my other problem was no one can ever definitively agree what is the standout best ever commercially released Amstrad CPC 464 game by a clear margin for the number 1 spot. I've honestly sat there for hours scratching my head. Even if this is meant to be my own personal favourites list, I still have to pick a winner that people would be satisfied with. That would make sense. So I'm going to break some rules here of my top 10. It's not going to be a traditional top 10 video like you see on other YouTube channels, and there'll be in some cases maybe multiple choices presented. I'm copping out. And hopefully the game I eventually choose in the top spot makes some sense. I've tried to steer away from nostalgia choices, so my beloved Roland on the Ropes from Amsoft didn't make the cut. So I'm sorry if your similar Oh Mummies, Harrier Attacks and Roland in Times etc. from Amsoft don't appear either. They're all lovely games from when the machine was first released, but let's be honest, they're by far from the best ever games. However, of course, they're treasured little gems close to a lot of our hearts, and nothing can take that away. You often find games like Elite or Frost appearing in a few top Amstrad games lists, and it's tempting to put them here again because they're awesome games. The reason they're not here is simply because the Amstrad had slightly inferior conversions of them, and they were better on other computers. I'm not saying they still weren't brilliant games, and they're good versions, of course, just slightly better on rival machines, and it's perhaps best not to include them here for that reason. There may be a chunk of you asking why Laser Squad isn't in there, a firm favourite for many, but a genre that only appeals to a minority of gamers. Similarly, I would have liked to have put Emlyn Hughes International Soccer in the list, but there's a large percentage of you out there that don't like kicking a bag of wind around a muddy pitch. Plus the fact there's now CPC Soccer out there, a new homebrew footy game that arguably is better. Also, many will ask, where's Sorcery Plus? Well, I consider that a standout game for the CPC 6128 that you will want on disc. And this is about the CPC 464, remember. And next year is the 40th anniversary of the CPC 6128, so wait and see what comes in 2025. So, with all that out the way, here's a quick reminder of the rules. Number 1, they had to be released commercially in shops back in the day. Number 2, on cassette. And number 3, loading 64K of RAM on a real 464. We are celebrating the CPC 464's birthday after all, right? Okay, good? Right, let's get on with it then. Yes, I know, it's bloody Dizzy, but I think there'd be a riot in the comments if at least one Dizzy game didn't appear here, so I've put it in 10th place. The Oliver Twins' Little Egg is very beloved for good reason. The perfect blend of fantasy adventuring, simple puzzling and platforming that appealed to all ages and demographics and at budget pocket money prices. Even if there's a chunk of you out there that didn't gel with it, thought it was overrated, and hated how he rolled after jumping and all that, you can't please everyone, but you can't deny Dizzy's impact and importance. So I've chosen the third game in the series, Fantasy World Dizzy, as the standout game here, because it's the one where the Oliver Twins really nailed down the blueprint for all the rest of the Dizzy games that followed, ironing out all the niggles and issues, sorting out the key gameplay and mechanics, to having a really great fantasy setting, and also introducing the full Dizzy family into the game too. Most importantly for our celebration here though, the first 3 Dizzy games were all coded and made on the Amstrad CPC by the Oliver Twins, so Dizzy is intrinsically entwined with the history of the Amstrad, which the Olivers are very keen to acknowledge too, having recently spoken to one of them on my recent Jet Bike Simulator video.
And everything that we did, we started on the Amstrad and then we converted onto the Spectrum via a nice cable. I was going to say, well, Amstrad was an awesome machine. It really was. So yeah, we are big fans of the Amstrad.
So be proud, Amstrad fans. The most recognisable and famous UK 8-bit gaming icon, Dizzy, began on the Amstrad. But if Dizzy isn't your bag and you want a much more darker adventure, then why not check out Werewolves of London? There's less puzzling, more exploring, and much more munching, bloodshed, horror and action to sink your teeth into here. This atmospheric little game looks gorgeous and has a great little soundtrack to hum along to as you stalk your prey through old London town, murdering the evil family one by one that afflicted you with the curse of being a werewolf. And it has a cool day to night cycle that sees you transforming between human to werewolf, and with it different powers, abilities and problems. For example, the police are less interested in you as a human, of course, but as a werewolf, you can jump higher and across building rooftops. And of course, you can munch on the coppers. But the more you munch on, the higher the number of police that will be after you. It's a brilliant little game and highly recommended. Check it out. Ow! In ninth position, I've put Operation Wolf. And I think this is often unfairly overlooked and forgotten about, because honestly, I think this is one of the best arcade conversions on the Amstrad or any 8-bit home computer or console of the era. We have lovely full colour graphics, really making great use of the 464's colour palette without tipping over into the side of garish. Lots of great shooty sound effects and explosions with some brilliant tunes and memorable jingles before and after missions and when it's game over. I mean, those jingles are forever embedded in my head. And we have reasonably smooth fast action gameplay that perfectly captures what the coin-op was all about. In fact, it actually moves faster than the arcade. The most important thing though, and a port of Operation Wolf lives or dies on this, and that's how is the movement of that reticule the targeting cursor for shooting enemies? Because if it's awkward to move, or slow and laggy and unresponsive, then the game is just a complete failure despite how nice it looks and sounds. Well, I'm pleased of course to report that it's absolutely perfect. And that's why Operation Wolf on the Amstrad is so good and such a pleasure to play, because the targeting reticule on other versions is often a little bit awkward to move or a little bit slow and laggy, but the Amstrad version gets it just right. And I'm happy playing this on a standard joystick, arcade stick, even the keyboard is passable playing it on. There's even an official version for this for the Amstrad Magnum Phaser light gun. But yeah, I'd stick to playing this on an arcade stick style peripheral like the Quickshot Maverick if you have one for the best experience. Anyway, everything is here in this port on the Amstrad, apart from the jungle boss and the track sequence. What more could you expect from an arcade conversion of Operation Wolf? Apart from the FM Towns port, which only a tiny minority of us will only ever see, this is honestly, in my humble opinion, the best conversion of the game, and it's on the Amstrad CPC 464, all in 64K of memory too. Now, many of you will have heard me expressing my love for this game before in 8th position, Destructo, or to give it its full title, The Island of Dr. Destructo. You may have seen it being crowned the winner and first place in my top 10 best ever Amstrad budget games video a couple of years ago, for instance. And oh boy, what a little belter this one is. As I said in that video, it's a superb pick up and play game that 30 years later still has me utterly addicted. You're in charge of a fast little plane with usually a giant battleship below that you have to sink. The twist is, you have to shoot down the planes and helicopters attacking you, and it's the debris of those downed fighters that slowly puncture holes in the main target below. Usually it's 3 holes to sink and then you move on to the next location. It's a simple but very clever and exciting concept. You're going to have to be mowing down hundreds of planes per level, and it's the fast, frantic blasting action that hooks you in, superbly implemented with tight responsive controls and smooth gameplay with just utter mayhem and carnage on the screen that just leaves you utterly addicted, and I love it. But I'm a little worried that I perhaps personally love this game just a little too much and it's clouding my judgment. Does everyone else love this game as much as I do? Is it worthy of being in a top all-time 10? Well, if you fancy something slightly different but want more plane-based shoot-'em-up action, well, you can't go too far wrong with P47 Thunderbolt on the Amstrad. A really surprisingly accurate conversion of the arcade coin-op that looks absolutely gorgeous and is really fun to play. It's often overlooked and forgotten about for more well-known arcade licenses from bigger companies too. But don't sleep on this one. It's got the power-ups, the bosses, everything you want all crammed into 64K of RAM on the 464. But even better, and possibly even more slightly obscure, is Mr. Heli. This delightful little shoot-'em-up looks even better with some gorgeous graphics, even smoother scrolling and sprite movement, and there's loads of sprites, bullets and crazy action on the screen, and all with a cutesy melody and music to bop along to. Plus all the big bosses to fight at the end of all the levels. A really impressive arcade coin-op conversion, which again is often overlooked and forgotten about too. So take your pick out of those 3 for 8th position if you want. I mean, my heart is with Destructo. Mr. Heli is damn impressive, but maybe a little too twee for shoot-'em-up traditionalists who might want to stick with P47. Grisor nearly always appears in these Amstrad top lists, so yeah, it's got to be at least mentioned here. I thought about putting it around about here in 7th place, it seems about right, and it stayed about here for a while, and I thought it would remain here. I mean, look at it, it looks bloody stunning. Gorgeous graphics, animation and pixel art. The sprites are moving about at least 25 frames per second locked in, which is very impressive and difficult to achieve on the Amstrad, and it's definitely got that feel of the arcade original. It's got all the weapons and the into the screen levels are great. Everything is going so well here, but there's 2 major issues. Of course, the main big one is it doesn't bloody scroll. Argh! It's single screen. You can't have Contra and not scroll. Duh. And the other issue is it's missing at least 1 entire level. Oh well. But for that first main issue, I'm not sure I can keep it in the top 10. So why not switch to the other game from the same coder and graphics artist, John Brandwood and Mark K. Jones's superb Renegade. Now, on this one, it doesn't matter about the scrolling. All the fighting can happily happen on the same screen just fine. We still have the sprites and the wonderful animation locked in at least 25 frames per second again. The graphics are beautiful, as much as a grimy CD setting can be. But we now have an absolutely thumping soundtrack to bop along with, complete with bone-crunching sound effects, and some very memorable jingles to punctuate levels or when the game is over. In this gangland thump-em-up, which arguably is even better than the coin-op it's converting from, it's all packed into 64K of RAM, and the Amstrad and Specky versions are pretty much universally agreed to be the best versions. All that's missing is the throw move and the run move from the arcade. Oh, and of course the scrolling. But you may have seen the homebrew update from last year called Renegade Reloaded that added in the running move and the scrolling, including a running flying kick and a running punch. It's insane, and for me definitely makes it the better version now over the Specky. However, you do need 128k of RAM to play it, so I can't really include that here. Anyway, also, it was tempting to pick the sequel Target Renegade, especially for its addition of its simultaneous 2-player mode, and I have to be honest, I probably spent more hours on that game than the original. Making these lists are so hard. I don't know, though, just something about the original Renegade seems more impressive though. But you know, feel free to substitute the sequel here if you want to, if that feels better for you. In 6th place is your Amstrad isometric game of choice. Now, those of you who follow me for a long time will know I'm not the biggest fan of the isometric adventuring genre, but undeniably the Amstrad has some flipping great ones. So there's 3 to choose from here, and to be honest, my top choice is Head Over Heels. A game initially for years I put off really diving into until I forced myself to long play it for the channel, and it's then that I discovered the genius of its design and gameplay, and of course the foolishness and error of my ways, because it's a masterclass of design, coding and pixel art that you can only truly appreciate if you fully immerse yourself and dedicate hours to the game, making notes and maps as you go along. It's really not for casual gamers, although it does for a while ease you in to some extent. But after a while, mapping is probably required. It's not a small game, but plenty of fun can be found here, and it's much easier to get into than, say, my other choice here, like Get Dexter, or as it's known in France, Crafton and Zunk, which I found to be utterly confusing to get into. One day, though, I will sit down and work it out, because thankfully, it's a much smaller area and map to explore than Head Over Heels, so maybe there's some potential here to figure out. Well, it looks absolutely beautiful and just has that French flair and humour all over it. You'll often find this game in many Amstrad top lists too. I've just never got very far to fully recommend it. But if you want something a little more arcadey than adventure-y, then the classic old Spin Dizzy might appeal. It's one of the highest rated games ever in Amstrad Action Magazine, with them giving it a whopping 96%. Although, to be fair, this was back in 1986, and it's probably aged now somewhat. At the time, this was originally an Amstrad exclusive game too, so it got them a little bit excited perhaps. It only later got ported to other computers, but it was programmed on and for the Amstrad first. A kind of a massively expanded Marble Madness, but with gyroscopes. I always found it a little too frustratingly hard for my tastes, but there's an army of ardent fans of this game out there still. Overall though, on reflection, I still think Head Over Heels deserves getting 6th place in this top 10. Oh no, another one with 3 choices. I'm such a cop-out. Well, all 3 featured here could have easily taken up 3 slots here in the top 10. I'm putting these right in the middle in 5th position, but let's start out with Ikari Warriors. Probably technically the best with its smooth scrolling and sprite movement, simultaneous 2-player option, loads of sprites and explosions on screen, and you can hop in and out of tanks for extra carnage. This is brilliant! All that's missing is an in-game tune to really push it over the edge. Just simply superb run and gun action that handles the rotary joystick from the coin op brilliantly by allowing you to have a separate key to lock in your direction if you want to, which you can always redefine to be the second fire button on the joystick. I think the only downside here is the action is a tiny bit slow paced, but there's always so much going on that if it was any faster it would simply be far too difficult. But Ikari Warriors, or Ikari Warriors, however you want to pronounce it, is just bloody awesome. However, if you do want your run and gun action fast and furious, then go for Elite's Commando conversion. Now, this is my personal favourite, but perhaps not everyone's. The graphics are a little bit simple and crude, but I still think they do the job perfectly fine. The music, whilst memorable, is a little one-note sounding, but I still adore it. But it's all about the gameplay, which is fast blasting action, spraying the screen full of bullets as you race up the screen, chucking nades, and I think it captures the spirit of the arcade coin-op better than most of the other 8-bit versions. It still has me coming back for more to this day. It's one of the few Amstrad games I regularly reach for from the shelf again and again. But I respect that not everyone feels this way, and it's not without its faults. It's ridiculously hard on its later stages, and there's some horrendous slowdown when it tries to render in a black road or airport landing strip, whatever the hell it's meant to be on one stage. But I just love Commando on the Amstrad, I love it to bits. But anyway, if you want something a bit more slow paced, thoughtful and tactical than Commando, then Who Dares Wins 2 is your game. You have to tackle things screen by screen here, and have to figure out how best to take out all the enemies, sometimes avoiding tanks, boats and planes, and also rescuing your captured comrades along the way too. It's almost cutesy compared to the madness of Commando, and is another beloved old school classic from the midst of time. I also love this one to bits, and it's nice to chill out to at a more sedate pace if you prefer that kind of thing. However, I'll be happy with any of these games in 5th place, to be honest. All 3 of them classics on the Amstrad CPC 464. Well, this is where Ocean Software starts to take over this list a little bit. We've got a movie double bill here for 4th place, and I've decided to put both these film licenses next to each other, or it would just be an Ocean Fest this video. So first up, it's RoboCop, and this game stayed in the charts longer than any other. It has got to be the biggest selling Amstrad game of all time, right? I mean, I've got no actual official data to back that up, just the charts. Unless a budget game sold more copies like Dizzy or something. Anyway, we all know this one, right? It's freaking RoboCop, and it's awesome. The Amstrad and Spectrum had the best versions until the later Game Boy one came along, and it ruled. Coda Might Lamb somehow pulled off a decently smooth software scroll, and I love the walking animation on RoboCop. It's just the right speed too, and he doesn't jump either. I never understood RoboCop being able to jump in later games. I mean, he weighs a bloody ton. He's a big, hefty, badass machine, and it's all about your skill with timing your shots and ducking when needed. If you think about it, from a game design perspective, given how limited the range of movement is, being only able to move left and right, or duck, is actually quite hard to pull off so brilliantly. I mean, similar games like Dick Tracy or E-SWAT didn't fare so well. And you've got some different levels to mix things up a bit, like the Photo Fit ID level and the Alleyway Rescue, where yes, on the Amstrad version, you can shoot through the skirt and shoot the guy in the dick. Your move, creep. Great graphics, and oh, that wonderful music score on both the title screen and in-game. It's an absolute classic. So what's our other movie license choice here? Well, you've probably guessed it by now, but Ocean's other big one, a year later, was Batman the movie. To be honest, I think this is technically speaking the better game. It took a lot from RoboCop and made it bigger and better. It's the same coder, Mike Lamb, and he's clearly taken over some of his RoboCop code and improved it here, because Batman can use his bat rope to swing around levels and it's super good fun. You really get the sense and feeling of actually being Batman, chucking his batarangs, taking out Joker's henchmen from above. But most of all, I love the freedom of being able to tackle those platform levels how you want, and there's different routes you can take. Some are easier than others, some are shorter but possibly harder to navigate, and that's cool. Then you have the Batmobile and the Batwing levels and a puzzle level in the Batcave just to keep things interesting too. That's really good value and all are excellent, with some absolutely fantastic graphics and outstanding memorable music from Matthew Cannon to keep you bopping along, which just fits perfectly with the Cape Crusader or Dark Knight, whatever you want to call him. Honestly, some of the best music on the Amstrad. I'm only sad that they didn't add more of those platforming levels because they're brilliant. 2 levels seems too little and the code base is there ready to be used. It's just begging for a 3rd level to be added in the middle of the game, maybe set in the Gotham Museum? Anyway, I digress. This and RoboCop, the 2 best movie licenses on the Amstrad? I'll let you decide which is the best one of the 2. My heart is kinda with RoboCop, but Batman is technically the better game. Blimey, this is turning into an Ocean Software Fest. In 3rd place, it's my beloved Chase HQ. But we'll give shout outs to 2 other games here as well. And as with RoboCop, you'll need 128k RAM to hear the digitised sound, and I've left it in here. But anyway, this is an astonishing arcade coin-op conversion that really doesn't go for accuracy in terms of looks, but instead goes its own way and plays to the strengths of the machine in the 464. And Bill Harbinson's graphics look gorgeous here, making great use of the Amstrad's palette. That Porsche 928 never looked so good on an 8-bit machine, but to cram in all the frills and spills of the coin-op's gameplay and to give that same experience on the Amstrad is stunning, and it's all down to the genius coder John O'Brien. The success of Chase HQ is its combination of racing game with action, as you hit the turbos and then have to ram and smash criminals off the road. It's such a wicked combination. I still come back to this game today, years later, having played it hundreds and hundreds of times, and it's still a challenge. It's still fantastic fun, and I always find myself thoroughly engaged on the edge of my seat, screaming at the screen, usually on the last level's criminal as the clock has a few seconds left, and I only need 1 or 2 more hits on him. I've got no more turbos left, and Nancy's moaning at me that my time is running out. It's just exhilarating. I don't know of and can't think of any other Amstrad or 8-bit game that can do that or elicit such a response or excitement from me. And that, dear listener and viewer, is what gaming is about. Fun, enjoyment, engagement, excitement. And for a game to still be able to do that to me 35 years later, as it did back in 1989 as a kid, that is damn impressive. And that's why it's so high on the list. And I hope you agree with me. But if you like your driving games more pure, then coder John O'Brien's earlier WEC Le Mans or WEC Le Mans, however you want to pronounce it, maybe that's the one you'd like to take for a test drive. Now this is slightly faster and smoother and is just pure racing goodness. Sadly, it's a little bit more drab in the graphics department, being in mode 1 and 4 colours, and they've chosen some rather muted and bland colours, but don't let that put you off. Gameplay is always king, and this is arguably the best pure racing game on the Amstrad. Although, some would argue Continental Circus is the better one, being more arcadey. Now, this is in full colour and a heck of a lot of fun. A surprisingly good arcade conversion. Despite the cars looking all the same, the graphics are great. Much better sound effects than WEC Le Mans, especially for the car noises, which are far less irritating. And some lovely jingles and music too. Not only are you racing against the clock, but it also has a neat checkpoint system where you have to be in a certain race position to qualify too, along with your car catching fire if you hit someone, and you have to make the decision whether to waste time going into the pits to get your car fixed, or risk limping over the line or blowing up before it, giving the game an extra intensity, and I love that. In second place, we have another double choice and two astonishing and unexpected conversions here to the Amstrad CPC 464. The first one I'm looking at here is Donkey Kong, and yes, yet another ocean game, sorry. This one often flies under the radar, but weirdly, the Amstrad got an almost arcade perfect version of Donkey Kong. On initial inspection, it's so close to the coin-up original that for a while we wondered if Arcana Software Design, who handled the port, simply took the original source code and somehow just dumped it or emulated it on the Amstrad. Seeing as the coin-up also used a Z80 chip like the Amstrad has. This version even has a kill screen and bug for it just like the arcade. Although, on much closer inspection there are some minor differences, and the kill screen occurs at a different point. And some techniques high-level Donkey Kong players use don't quite work the same on the Amstrad version, but they're very close to. I mean, I've asked some friends who are to play and test it, you see, and regardless of the outcome, they've all come away saying they loved the Amstrad version and been very impressed with it. This is honestly probably the best official conversion of Donkey Kong out there, and it appeared on bloody Lord Sugar's Amstrad CPC 464 of all machines. Not even the NES and an official Nintendo machine or anything. One of the greatest arcade coin-ops of all time, and most likely the best conversion came to the Amstrad CPC 464. And there you go. But if Donkey Kong is a bit too old for you or a bit repetitive, then another surprise from back in the day was a rather brilliant and accurate conversion of Prince of Persia to the Amstrad, when the ZX Spectrum and Commodore 64 didn't even get one. Well, fans of those machines had to wait many years for fan-made conversions, but due to the popularity of the CPC in France, vive la France, Broderbund decided to port it with microids on coding duties. And for those of us in the UK, we have Domark to thank for distributing it here. Looking beautiful in mode 0 with all the animations it's famous for, this is a brilliant port with everything you'd expect, including the intro sequences and all the intermission scenes and all the animations. The only minor grumble is the music is rather one note and could have sounded a bit better. Other than that, it's the Prince of Persia you all know and love here, brilliantly recreated on the Amstrad CPC 464, and it's a huge and big game, so plenty to get your teeth into. Whether you pick this here or Donkey Kong for second place, I don't care. Both are stunningly accurate conversions and a jewel in the crown for any CPC collectors. So, here we are at last on our first place game, and yikes, did this make me scratch my head for hours. I did my best to weigh everything up here, mostly what commercially released game truly pushed the Amstrad to the limits, but still maintains the best gameplay, and then looked at the best graphics, sounds and presentation, and there was one game that I kept coming back to that had that all wrapped up in one package. It's perhaps not without its little faults in places. I mean, what game is perfect? And there's no music in game if you don't have 128k of RAM. However, the sound effects are still really good, and well, you're all seeing it running here anyway, and it's prehistoric too. And it's no coincidence that it's one of the last ever games released on the Amstrad in 1993, when you'd expect coders to know how to get the most out of the machine by then. And B, it's pretty much an Amstrad exclusive, not released on any other system. In fact, it's a port of an obscure PC DOS title that hardly anyone bought or knows exists. And C, the programmer of the game, is a coding genius who graduated from the Amstrad public domain and demo scene, and demo coders know all the tricks and their machines inside out. I'm talking about Elmer Krieger, of course, and I could have quite easily put his other Amstrad game, Super Cauldron, here too. With all those ingredients, it's no wonder Prehistoric 2 is as good as it is. It's platforming perfection with a lovely jump mechanic and controls, with just the right amount of inertia on your little caveman. There's plenty of hidden secrets to find as you explore the world to keep things interesting, and there's some impressively huge boss fights too. Later on, you even get to fly hang gliders. Although this is about the CPC 464, just wait and see what this looks like on an Amstrad Plus machine. But anyway, Prehistoric 2 is my ultimate choice for the #1 commercially released Amstrad CPC 464 game. I think it pushes this 464 right to the limits in terms of, well, we've got smooth hardware scroll horizontally and vertically with no defects or issues. Some of the best graphics we've seen in a CPC game. It's one of the best platformers on the system. I mean, it's almost 16-bit in quality, despite some slowdown in places. There's decent sound effects, and it's really good fun exploring the world and discovering secrets. I mean, it's hard to find another commercially released CPC game that does more. So, I hope you agree on my reasoning. If not, let me know what your choice would be for the #1 spot in the comments below, or what your top 10 would be. I would love to know. And I would like to thank Lord Sugar, Roland Perry, and everyone involved at Amstrad for giving us this wonderful machine. You know, some people often wonder or ask, why are you so attached to a computer that's now 40 years old, and think we're silly or sad and belittle us? You know, that's okay. They just don't understand. Often when you're growing up as a little boy or a little girl, sometimes life might not have been so great. Perhaps you might have been bullied or picked on at school, and your teachers were rubbish. Maybe your siblings and parents might not have been so great and home life was tough. But the one reliable thing in your life that was always brought you joy and actually taught you some stuff and never let you down, apart from some of the rubbish games, was your Amstrad. That's a fixed point of happiness in your childhood, in your memories. It's not just nostalgia, it stood by you and was always there for you, and it set you on your course for life. And for some of you, set you up in your careers too. That's where I did all my homework and started to learn to code, and eventually went on to do a computing degree at university and got a job after. That's why we form communities and come round to celebrate the Amstrad 40 years later. We bond over it, we reminisce and form new friendships through shared experiences. And we look to keep the Amstrad alive with new and interesting games, new projects and new hardware to make it more accessible to existing and new users. That's why the Amstrad scene is alive, thriving and growing in 2024, and I'm pleased to say it really is one of the most welcoming and friendliest communities in the retro gaming scene. So be proud, Amstrad users, and happy birthday to the Amstrad CPC 464. Thank you for watching, and goodbye. Bye. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please click a like below, leave a comment, and also subscribe if you haven't already. And over that way, there's another video for you to check out. Zypho out.